Welcome to the Speak Like a Leader podcast with John Bates. Welcome to the show. With me is a good friend of mine named John Briggs, and he is the founder of Insight Tax, and he's an author, and his latest book is called The 3.3 Rule. You can find it on Amazon, and you can find him at Insight Tax, INCITETAX. And you can find him also at 33rulebook.com. That's the number 3, rulebook.com. And John and I have known each other for quite a while now. We met through Profit First. And John, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Well, it's absolutely my pleasure. So, one of the things that I really think is important is that, as you've got a big accounting firm and you help people with their accounting and their taxes. And one of the things that we kind of met over is when I was speaking at Profit First, and I suggested that even though the accounting is very logical, what you're doing for people is very cut and dried in a way, and very logical. Our relationship with money as human beings, so your client's relationships with money, is a whole other story, right? So, and it really, the fact that communicating with human beings is not logical, it's biological, really comes into the conversation around taxes and accounting in a way that I think a lot of tax preparers and accountants don't think about. Now, what do you think about all that?
Yeah, 100% we don't think about it. It definitely was a mindset shift that I needed to take on after meeting you and learning through that. But then after realizing that everyone is communicating on a biological level first, I started uncovering examples in my life that, like, you know what? Okay, I can see that. So for example, years and years ago, we decided to niche with some of our marketing message with micro gym owners. So think F45 studio owners, Orange Theory, CrossFit, boutique fitness, right? Those types of gym memberships. And we worked with enough that we had a lot of good data that supported like 3 important things that they needed to do to have a successful business: group training, personal training, and personal nutrition. And we would say, hey, you looks like you don't have personal training or nutrition on your books here. You should consider implementing that. And I always was confused and got frustrated. Like, I don't understand why you guys aren't implementing this information. It's logical. The data supports this, right? And it wasn't until I purchased my own gym to build credibility as a firm that works with gym owners where we got into it. And as we started making changes, there's a lot more involved than just simply saying, hey, here's the data, this is what you should do. We had to get the coaches on board, which is a biological communication. We had to get members on board who may or may not want the services.
Right.
So I started seeing that until we could communicate to our gym owners, like, look, let's actually try this hat on for a second, the emotion on. You're going to present this to your coaches. How do you think that's going to feel? And so we helped them walk through the actual experience so they could emotionally tie themselves to how they thought their coaches were going to react, how their members were going to react. And it wasn't until that happened that they actually started taking action that resulted in higher profitability for their gym.
Yeah, that's really cool. So that's, I think that's a really great example, right? We pound people over the head with logic and the data and all that, and they still don't respond. We got to take a step back and think about what's really going on for this human being that is not a machine.
Yeah. Another thing that comes to mind too, John, when a client gets a letter from the IRS, sometimes we'll read it. And, well, I should say this. The email we get saying, "Hey, I got a letter from the IRS," often comes with a lot of extra drama.
Right.
Um, which from a standpoint of communication, what you've taught us makes sense if myself and my team are willing to like take a step back and look at this rationally. It's like, wow, they're very concerned about this
Yeah.
IRS letter, which we just looked at and is not concerning at all.
Yeah.
Um, right. But
Right.
we have the experience in their mind. uh, They think the IRS is coming in and they're going to take their house away.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
they easily emotionally get into that dark place real fast when an IRS letter shows up.
Yeah.
And understanding that it is that biological emotional connection first that they're coming from can
Right.
help us be a lot more patient with the client,
Yeah.
which then furthers the communication we have with them and provides a better experience for them. But without that, I know the tendency is for us to immediately just be like, dude, come on, calm down. This isn't necessary. Chill
Yeah.
out, which is not actually a good thing to tell anyone when they're upset.
Yeah. Chill out doesn't really do it. It's funny, I mean, it reminds me, I last year, I had a surgery and I got a post-op infection, and, I didn't know if that was maybe going to kill me. And nobody ever took the time to sit me down and say, John, it is very unlikely that this is going to be anything but a really major inconvenience. It was, 8 months in before somebody finally told me that,
Wow.
and so I do think that biological, I like how you say it, we're communicating biologically first, and you've got to think about the emotions of people versus just the logic of the situation. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, and the relationship that your clients have with their money, it's, I think to be generous with people and I think truthful, it's not really about the money, right? Like it doesn't, like, I love having a pile of $100 bills, or I love a huge deposit into my bank, but it's not the money that I love. It's that is how I'm providing for my family. And that's how I'm, taking care of the people I love and taking care of myself. And a lot of business owners look at that as a measure of their success, right? Because if I'm offering something that's really valuable and people are paying for it, that's good. So there's all these emotions that are wrapped up in that. And so I think it's really fabulous that you guys, because I've noticed with the people that I work with from your firm that, you guys do have a lot of space for that emotion, I think, much more than most places that I've experienced in the accounting world, So I do think it's just a really huge, huge difference.
Yeah, I would say anyone who's dealing with a client facing service, like you got to give yourself the type of training that you offer that gives us that space to even realize, right? Because we don't know what we don't know. And until you
Yeah.
came along and taught us all communications biological first, uh, we were the typical accountant, which, there's a stereotype for a reason, because of the way our brain works and we're good with the numbers can be a limiting factor in our emotional
Uh-huh.
intelligence sometimes.
Uh-huh.
But I believe emotional intelligence can be learned, and certainly it's evidenced by what you've taught us, where the team can do that. Now, I wish we were better at it. Like there's definitely moments where I get to get involved when the client gets upset in the way they're communicated with. And in most cases, we can go back and look at it and see the communication and be like, yep, I
Yeah.
can see how my team member completely overreacted and decided not to take that space first.
Yeah.
But and I don't know if that's a natural thing, John, like with all people, or just maybe those of us who are more, um, I guess, is it left brained? Um, just the need to constantly work on it and kind of ultimate diligence on always trying to give
Yeah.
that space.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it's really easy for human beings to just react, and I think that it's one of the reasons that I'm a big fan of mindfulness and have a mindfulness practice myself is to just try to get that moment in between something happening and my reaction, like just a little bit of space there makes all the difference. And I think that remembering that logic is not what is the first thing for people. Our emotional side is much faster to react, and there are a lot of huge benefits from that, but there are some downsides.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense.
So let's talk about the 3-3 rule book, because that's you did write Profit First for Micro Gyms, which people can find. If you've got a micro gym, you should grab that. But you just came out with the 3-3 rule book. So tell us a little bit about that. And I know there are a few interesting anecdotes that I want to dig into here with you, but tell us about the book overall.
Yeah. So the 3.3 rule, it initially started as kind of just a pet project. I was hoping to get something out to the accounting industry to explain to them or show them really there's a better way. And so for those listening who aren't aware, the typical accounting model, the firm model is bring in employees and squeeze every last ounce of soul out of their life until they give up on accounting and have to choose a different profession.
Right.
And so lots of high hours leads to burnout, leads to dissatisfaction in life, leads to lots of other problems that just are spiral effects. And as I started writing it, I was presenting the idea to other people, and people would say, well, I'm a lawyer, attorneys need this too. I'm an engineer, my industry could use this. I was a computer programmer, it come to find out, companies overworking employees is not limited to just the accounting industry.
Right.
And so I really wanted to look at what are things that we're doing as a firm that I can back with science that is applicable to anyone in any organization, so that we can get to a point where society stops saying we're accepting that this is how it is. We're accepting that we're going to work 50 to 70 hours a week. Like, how do we get to the point where collectively across the board as society would just say, like, enough is enough. We can find contentment without killing ourselves.
Yeah.
And let's maybe have a better relationship between our work and our life. And so that's kind of where the book came from.
Yeah. Well, so I know that you've implemented a number of these things kind of in the face of the conventional wisdom, particularly in the accounting field. Let's talk about the basic idea of the book. What are you advocating for here?
Yeah. So the rule itself says the most efficient workday consists of working up to 3 hours at a time, followed by a 30% recovery period. So the first 3 in the 3.3 refers to up to 3 hours, and the 0.3 refers to the 30% recovery break we should take. So if I worked the full 3 hours, I would follow that with an hour of complete non-work. If I did something for an hour and I felt like I was kind of at my focus end, I would only take a 20-minute break afterwards. So that's where the 30% comes into play. I wanted it to be something flexible, because we all get into tasks, and certain tasks I can really focus on for a while and be productive, where others, so forecasting, you give me some numbers and hey, let's do some forecasting. Dude, I could go 3 hours straight. I love that stuff. I'm not a professional author, so writing the book itself, like an hour and a half was about my max. And so depending on the tasks that we take on, we need to understand that those take more or less out of us. If I'm an introvert and I'm a receptionist for some reason, if that were to happen, I would probably be taking shorter breaks throughout the day as opposed to sitting down and working and just taking a bunch of phone calls.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really that, it's not just companies and accounting firms. Like, I think I could learn this lesson. You know, I remember reading about it, when you came out with this, and I'm still working on implementing, but I think it's really, really important. And, you talk about where the 40-hour work week came from, right? Because it was handed down from heaven as the way that we should do it, right?
Yeah, that's right. They were, I think, inscribed on some tablets.
Tablets, yeah.
Yeah, no. So we never usually stop to think about this, but early 1800s, well, in the 1800s, I should say, typical work hours were 80 to 100 hours a week. Industrial age, the idea was we got to keep these machines running. Obviously, not a lot of laws in place, or any laws in place to protect workers. I mean, if you imagine I'm working 80 to 100 hours a week, then you add in my sleep time, that's not a lot of time left in the week to do anything else. So once you take in your personal maintenance of eating food, like that's it, that's the week.
Yeah.
So early 1900s comes along, and this guy wanted to sell more motorized carriages. And who doesn't want motorized carriages? People who are working 80 to 100 hours a week and then sleeping the rest of the time. They don't have any leisure time for anything.
Yeah.
So in order to sell these more, because people lived close enough to their job that they're like, I don't see the practical nature of buying one of these things to take me to work. I'm just walking.
Yeah.
The only reason they would need it is for leisure activities. Well, so what do? How do you create more leisure activities? You give workers more time off. So Henry Ford decides, you know what? I'm going to give them an extra day off, because at the time it was Monday through Friday or Monday through Saturday. They only had one day off a week was the norm. It's like, I'm going to give them 2 days. He created the weekend for us. And he said, I'm going to cap them at 8-hour blocks, because I want them to leave work energized enough so that when they go into the weekend, they don't feel like they need the whole weekend to recover to get back to work. Now, all of a sudden, they have all this energy, and it's like, oh, let's go there. We have time. We can go drive there, but it's far enough. Yeah. We need to drive instead of. So Henry Ford created the current 40-hour work week, which was a masterful thing for the success of his company. He was villainized at the time, but
wow.
Here we are 100 years later, still doing the same thing, even though we have 100 years of science that we can now look at that he didn't, because it didn't exist, and he just did it to sell more cars. But we kept with it.
So what are you guys doing at your firm that's different now?
So it comes more into the, how do we let them do it? So the idea of a 40-hour work week a lot of the time is, let's keep my butt in the seat and let's have people work. Well, there's studies that show on average, your team is producing 2 hours and 53 minutes of work a day. In an 8-hour workday, they're getting in less than 3 hours of actual productivity. And once you look at the science, you can totally see why. Because if I'm asked to sit here all day just working, my brain cannot sustain that type of focus. Mm-hmm. It's scientifically proven. It's not possible. And so what we want to do is we build in these breaks so that they know I'm going to work to a time, and then I'm going to get to completely reset. And so like some of the stuff that we do, we give them the break time, but then we ask like, dude, take a break with somebody else. Yeah. So that you guys can just hang out and build a relationship, not talking about work and not feeling guilty that you're hanging out in the break room when your supervisor walks by. They're not going to say like, hey, get back to work.
Right.
They're going to assume you're not at your desk, you're on a break time. Cool. Like trust is important, you know?
Yeah.
And now this way, when they come back from that break, they actually have, their mind has reset. And when they go back, they will be able to focus more.
Yeah. That's really cool. I mean, and that's got to take a lot of trust and maybe make you feel vulnerable as the business owner.
100%. I mean, because ultimately, if you look at the math in an 8-hour workday, I'm saying I'm going to ask you to actually only work 6 hours. You're
Right.
going to have 2 hours off that I'm paying you for that I'm purposely saying don't work.
Yeah.
Like from a logical standpoint, if you don't know the science, you could say like, that seems like an unprofitable business decision.
Yeah.
But when you see the data and you see that, well, they're only producing less than 3 hours anyways, now they can actually produce the full 6 hours. It actually is a better profitability move for a company.
Yeah. So it's been something that you've seen positive results from.
Yeah, I mean, since implementing that rule in our business over the course of 4 to 5 years, 492% growth.
Wow.
And that doesn't include the crazy growth we had over the last 12 months either. So the percentage would be in the thousands at this point.
Wow. That's a pretty resounding result for that.
Yeah.
And you have people take like real vacations too, right? Like they're mandatory.
Yeah, that's right. We give them PTO. We even allow, because tax season is tax season and we are going up against government deadlines.
Mm-hmm.
We have averaged 42.6 hours a week during tax season in the last 3 years, where most firms are minimum 55 hours. So their average is closer to 60, 65.
Yeah.
So I'm happy that we're really, really close to 40. But if they do end up working more than 40 hours in a week, we give them that time minute for minute in their PTO bucket so they can take that off later in the year.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I've got to imagine that engenders some loyalty.
Yeah. I mean, it's great. We have a gratitude channel. We use Slack. And so every Monday we ask everyone in the company to share 3 things they're grateful for. And it's really nice to see every week multiple people making comments like, I'm just grateful I have a job that I'm excited to come to on Monday.
Yeah.
Like that raises up their life. I mean, if you
Yeah.
enjoy the job that you have, that's not going to be a negative factor in the other things you do in life. But someone who doesn't like their job, it's like the only thing they can talk about or think about is how much they hate their job. It totally consumes them, right?
Yeah.
And so while the positivity of having a good job that doesn't necessarily totally consume them, but it does give them the space to actually, live. They don't live to work, they're working to live. And so it gives them that opportunity to actually have flexibility when they leave the work. So they have the mental space to do other things.
I mean, and I can imagine this being initially a bit of a hard sell to like a hard-nosed law firm or a hard-nosed accounting firm. But it sounds like you've seen results that you could make that argument pretty strongly.
Yeah, I can make the argument, but you're right. It's going to be a hard sell. I actually dedicated the book to the Big Four, which is a phrase known like that in the accounting world. The largest 4 accounting firms, they're all billion-dollar industry companies.
Yeah.
They're known as the Big Four. I dedicated the book to them and I asked them to do better, and the book shows them how to do that. But
that's really cool. I think we might have people from the Big Four listening right now. So
I'm not super optimistic that they'll actually adjust completely, but I could be wrong. I hope so. Like, I mean, at the end of the day, they're the trend creators in the accounting industry, just like the bigger law firms are the trends. And it just like Henry Ford set a trend and said, you know what, I'm going to shorten the work week from 80 hours to 40 hours. They have an opportunity here to do the same thing and have that legacy live on under the fact that they welcomed it. It's also interesting how you do the math, man. Like on average, an accountant leaves the industry within 3 to 5 years. Like if you kept that person for 10 years in your company, the amount of training and like the resources that go into getting someone up to speed where they're efficient and productive and learning, like all that stuff. I never understood the churn and burn model. Like, treat them so they want to stay because it's better for you. Like it's super selfish of me to do this for my team because they'll stay and then I don't have to replace them, which means I don't have to take on the cost. But anyways.
I mean, look, it starts to make logical sense when you look at it that way, right?
Yeah.
So I think there are a couple of different models that you talk about in there, like the, you know, if you're doing, and I think you already said this, but maybe you could break it
Yeah.
out, and I think you've got names for them and
Yeah.
everything.
So, three general approaches to the 3.3 rule. We have the sprinter, the jogger, or the Zen master. So,
Uh-huh.
a sprinter is someone who knows that their attention span is already short. Because again, there's no judgment here. Like, oh, your attention span is short, you can't ever be productive.
Yeah.
No, like you have to work with what you're given biologically. And so a
Yeah.
sprinter is usually going to work up to an hour. They're going to take a 20-minute break. A jogger is someone who can likely do an hour and a half to 2 hours at a time. And so if they did that, they're going to take a half-hour break. And then a Zen
Yeah.
master is someone who's capable of meditating, that concept of like, I can just sit here and meditate and do nothing else. So if I'm going to work the full 3 hours and I take an hour off afterwards. But what I also explain in the book is depending on the task, depending on my mood, depending on so many different factors, I might be a sprinter one morning. I could be a Zen master in the afternoon. The next day, I could be a jogger. Like, you really do need to let it fit into whatever you have going on. Because this
Yeah.
idea that every task you take on in your job is supposed to be enjoyable is such BS.
Yeah.
It's not feasible for any company. So
Yeah.
everybody's going to have tasks that they don't enjoy. So sometimes those tasks you don't enjoy are better split up in shorter increments. Like,
Yeah.
okay, I'll do an hour and I'll take a 20-minute break because I don't enjoy it and it's miserable.
Yeah.
And so again, introvert, extrovert, depending on the things you have going on, people just need to identify what's the right rhythm for them. I just want them to make sure that they're giving themselves that 30% recovery break after they're done working.
Yeah. So that's key, is the 30%.
It's critical. Yeah.
And it depends on what you're doing and how engaged you are in it and how whatever easy or not easy it is for you. Go a little bit longer with the things that are more engaging.
Yeah.
But
totally.
take that 30% break. So how do you do that in your day? Can I ask?
You sure can. Yeah. It depends on the task for sure. I'll block out my calendar. Like I have to put in the blocks just because
Yeah.
I have a slight drive to always just be working and doing something.
Right.
And I still fight the human tendency of, oh, I'm taking a break, I'm not doing anything. Like I can get a little twitchy. It's like, oh,
Yeah,
let me
dude,
just look at my
I'm
email real
so
fast,
with you.
right?
Yeah, I'm so with you on that. Yeah.
So I will put in blocks. I'll just break 3.3 break. And so I'll look at my calendar and see like, okay, I'm going to have 2 meetings in a row. I know I'm going to need a break because one-on-one meetings, for example, are tiring for me because it just takes energy as an introvert that is not natural to me. So like I'll follow that with a break. Other times it's like, okay, we have a project we're working on. I can really dig into that and do some really good deep work. I'm going to do a full 3-hour block right there. But that's the beauty of the rule, is depending on the needs, especially as an owner where no one day has ever been the same.
Yeah.
I can adapt the rule to my need. Now, you and I share a mutual friend in Mike McAllowitz.
Yeah.
And I spent a lot of time, like him working as a mentor with me on this book. And one of the things that he said is like, he's interesting as I'm reading your book and looking at the science, how he naturally wrote in like 55-minute blocks. I'd write 55 minutes and I knew I needed a 15-minute break afterwards, which is pretty darn close to the 3.3 math.
Yeah.
But we also know that he's a professional speaker. And when he gets up and does a presentation, he'd go 1-2 hours easy because that's the nature of the job. And so, we would say, follow that up with whatever the appropriate 30% recovery break is. And especially as a speaker, you would say, you know what, I have the speech itself, but like you taught me, you're always on. The second you walk into the facility, even before you present, after your presentation, you're still on. So you want to build that into your block, knowing when the speech is over, you're still probably going to need to talk to some of the audience members or however that's going to work, so that you're focused for the right amount of time and you're taking the break at the right time.
Yeah. I think it's really great. I mean, I think it's good to, for people to be able to see the science, for people to have a formula, because, I try to build in self-care time in my day, but until I had a formula, like, I didn't know. And I get twitchy when I'm not working on stuff too. So it's hard, it's hard for me. Like, sometimes I joke that I have a jerk for a boss, which is me.
Yeah.
But and what do you do during your day when you take that break?
Nothing. Usually I have another coworker here that I rely on a lot in the business.
Uh-huh.
I'll go into his office. I'm like, I'm on a 3.3 break. Can you take your 3.3 break right now?
Yeah.
And so then we'll just chat. I actually, on my office floor here, one of my favorite things to do is take a 10-minute
Uh-huh.
nap.
Uh-huh.
Super appropriate to do during a break.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's cool.
there's so many things. One of the early readers of the book, he sent me an email 6 months after I introduced the concept to him. And he's like, "Hey, I wanted to thank you. I've lost 20 pounds. And I said, I don't understand. Because in my mind, the relationship I had with him didn't correlate to him losing weight or anything, right?"
Yeah.
He's like, "Well, you told me about the book. And so what's been going on is I work a 9 to 12 morning block. And because I worked that, I now don't have any guilt taking a break. And I take the full hour break. So I'll eat some lunch, but I then walk my dog 2 miles every day. I eat a
Yeah.
healthier lunch knowing that I'm going to go walk. And then I
Yeah.
actually walk. And now that I did walk, when I come back to work, I don't crash in the afternoon. And because I'm not crashing in the afternoon, I don't need sugary food to keep my energy up to get me to 5 o'clock.
Right.
And because of those changes, I've lost 20 pounds. I was like, holy cow,
That's
that's pretty
awesome.
cool.
That is
Yeah. So
awesome.
self-care is a great thing to do during your break period.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, cool. So, I hope it's okay for me to ask you to tell this story, but one of the stories that I tell during my trainings is the story that you and your wife and your interaction. Because one of the things when we first met, one of the things that I do in those trainings is give people the 3 levels of leadership listening, right?
Uh-huh.
And so that's listening to be able to repeat something back to someone word for word, then also listening to be able to get their emotional world that they're coming from, not just the one emotion, but the whole, mix of emotions there. And then to really use those things to figure out what that person is committed to underneath what they've just said. And, yeah. Is that what you remember?
Uh-huh. Yep.
And so I'll never forget. It was like, I don't know, a week later or something. And I think you texted me and you're like, "Hey, John, it was worth it. The training was worth it," or something.
Yeah.
And will you tell us that story?
Yeah. And it's a good bookend because, we talked about like my team, for example, and receiving the email from a client who received an IRS letter.
Yeah.
Listening, the layers of listening as you teach it isn't necessarily with the ear, right? We can do that in email form as well.
Yes,
And if we
absolutely.
do those 3 layers of listening, it's a great technique to allow us to give us that space to really give grace to other people. So
yeah,
my my wife sent me a text and the text simply read, "Allegra threw up." Allegra is our 3rd child, 2nd oldest daughter. And, my wife and I, sometimes people think that, we're abrasive with each other, but we just communicate openly. Clear as kind. We don't call each other names. And so we have a deal in our household where I work. That's my responsibility. She's taken on the harder responsibility of raising the kids and being at home, but that is her responsibility. So on one hand, it's like, cool. Like, do you want me to send you a text back and just say like, "I'm working on 17 fires right now"? It's like, Allegra threw up. Like, I wanted to initially respond with, "That sucks." Just like a simple whatever.
Uh-huh.
But we had recently had the training, so I wanted to go deeper, like get to not just repeating what's the emotional attachment, what's the commitment level. And my wife is a planner, and she wakes up every day knowing exactly what she wants to do that day. And so the fact that Allegra threw up was unplanned, which meant whatever she had planned in the afternoon, she was going to be able to get to, which I knew would drive her insane, frustrate her, probably involve additional phone calls to people she had already made commitments to. So there's just a lot of extra work that she was going to need to do to take care of our daughter who, got sick. And so I thought through that, and my response was, would you like me to pick up dinner on my way home? And that was the exact commitment that she needed from me, because that's what she needed. That helped her get through, and she was then able to get to some of the other plans that she was going to get to, because now she didn't have to take time to make dinner. I was going to bring it back.
Yeah.
So that
Because
level
you
roasting, man, it's
knew,
legit.
because you knew that one of her biggest commitments is to having dinner on the table at 6 o'clock, so you can all have dinner as a family.
That's
Yeah?
right.
So you went right to her deepest commitment and what you could do about it. And I just think that is so great. I share that pretty often.
Yeah.
So I love it. I love it. Well, and I love the 3-3 rule. I do think that it's just I think it's, it's a modern way to look at work. And I think that a lot of, there's a lot of Sturm und Drang and upset and turmoil, it feels like, in the business world right now. And COVID really mixed things up, and people don't want to go back to the office, and people don't want to do meaningless jobs. And, so I think that this really brings a lot of the missing humanity that people are craving to running firms like this, where you still need to be hard-nosed about the bottom line, and you still need to be really productive, and there's still a whole lot to do and some stuff that you don't want to do. But I think that approaching it this way, it's science-based. And I just think that it fits in a lot better with what we're seeing that people want, that they don't necessarily know what they want, but this is part of what they want, I think.
100%. And then I think about the next evolution of how I imagine it will be applied is, look, there's nothing that says inspiration only happens between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m., right? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
if I'm over a team or something, I could get inspiration at any point during the day. Well, if
Yeah.
I've already done my work hours, what's going to happen?
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
and who's to say I can't start work until 9 o'clock? Like,
Yeah.
if I have kids at home, but I still want work because that gives me fulfillment, why can't I have a job where I work because I'm good in the morning from 6 to 9, and then I take care of my kids in the middle of the day?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the 3.3 rule should also allow us to have flexibility on when we get the work done, instead of
Yeah.
sticking to a 9 to 5. Now, there's certain roles and things like that, you got to work through that. But ultimately, we're most interested in results as a company. And so if someone's giving us 6 hours of productivity a day, that's the math for the 3.3 rule.
Yeah.
If those come at weird times, then that works for us.
Yeah. It's still productivity.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, so is there anything I should have asked you, or anything that you want to talk about that we didn't get to yet?
No, this was great. I just hope people will listen to it. I mean, obviously, selfishly, it's a small investment if people buy the book. I would greatly appreciate it. I put my heart and soul into it. It's what I've learned over business, and how to apply these things with science in my career. But I hope everyone gives it a shot, because that's the reason we created the book title the way we did, and the main concept the way we did, because you can apply this as early as today or tomorrow. Like the second you're hearing this, you can decide, I'm going to work up to 3 hours and I'm going to force myself to take a break afterwards and just
Yeah.
try it out. Like if
Yeah.
even the naysayers, it's like, great. The only way you can naysay me is if you provide evidence back to me that it doesn't work.
Right.
So the only way to do that is you have to give it a try. And I'm confident
Yeah.
if you give it a try, you'll have, there'll be fruit that you'll be able
Yeah.
to see.
Well, and you've put your money where your mouth is. I mean, this comes directly out of your experience of doing this yourself with your firm that's an accounting firm, which is, one of those firms that, like you said, traditionally squeezes just every last drop out of the grape, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's really cool, and congratulations to you for getting that out. And I love that it's already making a difference. That guy that lost weight and is probably a lot more productive on top of it, right?
Yeah, totally. Thanks for having me, John.
My pleasure, John. Thanks for joining me. And to those of you listening, thank you for joining us. And I will see you next time on speaklikealeader.show. Thank you for joining the Speak Like a Leader podcast. Go be awesome.